Picture this. You walk into a neighbor's house without knocking, grab a snack from their fridge, and nobody thinks it's weird. Kids disappear for hours to build forts in the woods, and parents don't panic. Strangers actually talk to each other in grocery store lines. And families gather around the dinner table every single night, not because they have to, but because they genuinely want to spend time together. Welcome to 1970s America, a decade that might just have been the last time life was actually better, simpler, and more connected than it is today. We've been told that everything gets better with time, that progress always means improvement. But what if I told you that in some really important ways, Americans in the 70s had it figured out better than we do now? What if the decade we think of as that awkward time before the internet was actually when America perfected the art of living well? I'm not talking about the big historical events or political drama that dominate most discussions about the 70s. I'm talking about the everyday magic that made life in 70s America feel richer, more connected, and surprisingly more fun than life today. The 70s were the sweet spot of American civilization. We had all the modern conveniences that made life comfortable, but we hadn't yet developed the technology and social habits that would isolate us from each other. We had prosperity without the crushing pressure of modern productivity culture. We had entertainment without the overwhelming choices that paralyze us today. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why people who lived through the 70s often say it was the best time to be alive in America. And more importantly, you're going to learn about specific aspects of 70s life that we could actually bring back today to make our lives better, more connected, and more genuinely enjoyable. This isn't nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. This is about understanding what we lost when we gained everything else. Let's start with something that seems almost mythical today: real neighborhoods, where people actually knew each other and looked out for each other without it being weird or intrusive. In the 70s, neighborhoods functioned like extended families. Not because people were forced to interact, but because the natural rhythm of daily life created organic connections that enriched everyone's experience. When you walked down your street, you didn't stare at your phone. You waved to Mrs. Johnson watering her garden, chatted with Mr. Caro Peterson washing his car, and stopped to pet the neighborhood dogs that everyone knew by name. The evening ritual was pure magic. As the sun started setting, people would naturally migrate to their front porches, front yards, or stoops. Not because they planned it, but because that's where the action was. Kids would be playing street games like Kick the Can or Red Rover. Adults would be grilling burgers or working in their gardens. Teenagers would be washing cars or working on bicycles. The whole neighborhood became this spontaneous social event that happened every single evening. Children had something that seems impossible today: complete neighborhood freedom. A 7-year-old could leave the house after breakfast and not come back until dinner, and parents weren't worried because they knew every adult in the neighborhood was keeping an eye out. Kids could knock on any door and ask for a glass of water or to use the bathroom, and it wasn't considered strange. They could play in anyone's backyard, climb any safe tree, and explore every corner of their world. But here's what made this really special: children developed real independence and problem-solving skills. When conflicts arose during neighborhood games, kids had to work things out themselves. When someone got hurt, they had to figure out which adult to ask for help. When they got bored, they had to use their imagination to create entertainment. This wasn't neglect. This was a whole community raising children together. The informal economy of neighborhoods was beautiful. People constantly borrowed and lent things: tools, ingredients, lawnmowers, anything. But it wasn't just about the practical exchange. Every time you borrowed sugar from a neighbor, you strengthened a social connection. Every time you helped someone move furniture or fix a car, You invested in a relationship that made your whole life richer. Block parties weren't special events that required months of planning and permits. They were spontaneous celebrations that happened when someone decided to drag their grill into the middle of the street and start cooking for anyone who wanted to eat. Neighbors would contribute whatever they had. Somebody would bring potato salad, someone else would bring beer, kids would set up games, and suddenly the whole street would be having a party that lasted until late at night. The most magical part was the intergenerational mixing. In 70s neighborhoods, elderly people weren't isolated in retirement communities. Teenagers weren't locked in their rooms with devices, and young parents weren't overwhelmed and isolated. Everyone mixed together naturally. Old Mr. Wilson would teach kids how to throw a curveball. Teenage girls would babysit for young mothers. New parents would get advice and help from experienced neighbors. Everyone had a role, and everyone contributed something valuable. Even the way people decorated and maintained their homes reflected this community spirit. Front yards were designed to be looked at and enjoyed by everyone walking by. People took pride in their gardens, their holiday decorations, and their general upkeep because they knew it contributed to everyone's enjoyment of the neighborhood. But it wasn't competitive or show-offy. It was generous and community-minded. The safety net of neighborhood connection was incredible. If someone got sick, neighbors would automatically bring food and help with children. If someone's car broke down, 3 people would offer rides before you even asked. If a family was struggling financially, help would appear in subtle, dignified ways that preserved everyone's pride while solving real problems. Family dinner in the 70s wasn't just a meal. It was the sacred center of family life, and it created a kind of intimacy and connection that families today struggle to achieve, even with all our communication technology. Every night at 6 o'clock, families across America performed this beautiful ritual. Everyone would gather around the dinner table. Someone would say grace or share a moment of gratitude. And then for the next hour, the family would actually talk to each other, not about schedules or logistics, but about ideas, feelings, stories, and dreams. The conversation was rich because there were no distractions, no phones buzzing, no television competing for attention, no urgent emails or text messages interrupting the flow. When someone was talking, everyone else was actually listening. When someone asked a question, they got a real answer. When someone told a story, it was heard and appreciated and often built upon by other family members. Children learned the art of conversation at these dinner tables. They learned how to share their thoughts clearly, how to ask good questions, how to listen respectfully, and how to contribute to group discussions. They learned about current events, family history, and adult perspectives on life. But most importantly, they learned that their thoughts and experiences mattered to the people who loved them most. Parents used dinner time to really connect with their children's inner lives. They would ask about school, friends, hopes, fears, and dreams. But these weren't interrogations. They were genuine expressions of interest and care. Children felt seen and heard in ways that built deep confidence and self-worth. The food itself was part of the magic. Most meals were cooked from scratch, not because people were trying to be gourmet, but because that's what normal cooking looked like. Mothers and fathers would spend time each day preparing meals that brought comfort and nourishment to their families. The kitchen smells, the anticipation of favorite dishes, and the satisfaction of sharing home-cooked food created sensory memories that lasted lifetimes. But dinner wasn't just about the immediate family. It was common for neighborhood kids to be invited to stay for dinner, for relatives to drop by and be welcomed to the table, and for families to host friends and neighbors regularly. The dinner table was a place of hospitality and inclusion that strengthened community bonds. The storytelling that happened at 70s dinner tables was extraordinary. Grandparents would share stories about their childhood. Parents would talk about their work and interests. and children would recount the adventures and discoveries of their day. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were how family, culture, and values were transmitted from generation to generation. Extended family dinners were epic events that created lifelong memories. Sunday dinners with grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins were elaborate productions that might last for hours. Multiple generations would gather around tables that had been extended with every available leaf and folding table. Children would be running between the adult table and the kids' table, absorbing the warmth and chaos of large family gatherings. The rhythm of meal preparation and cleanup was also a bonding experience. Children would help set the table, family members would contribute to cooking, and everyone would participate in cleaning up afterward. These weren't chores in the modern sense. They were shared family activities that created opportunities for one-on-one conversations and teaching moments. Holiday dinners were the pinnacle of this tradition. Families would spend days preparing elaborate meals that celebrated both the holiday and the family itself. The anticipation, the collaboration, the special dishes that only appeared on certain occasions, and the lingering conversations that stretched late into the evening created a sense of abundance and celebration that went far beyond the food itself. Even the way families handled conflict during dinner was healthier than modern approaches. Disagreements were discussed openly but respectfully. Different viewpoints were expressed and considered. Children learned how to disagree with their parents politely and how to defend their positions with logic and evidence. The dinner table became a safe space for working through family issues in a supportive environment. Childhood in 70s America was an adventure that today's children can barely imagine. A time when kids had real freedom, real responsibility, and real opportunities to discover who they were without constant adult supervision and structured activities. Summer vacation actually meant vacation. For 3 months, children were free to sleep late, play outside until dark, and create their own entertainment without a single organized activity or educational goal. There were no summer camps, unless families specifically wanted them, no pressure to use vacation time for academic improvement, and no guilt about children being unproductive. Summer was for childhood, pure and simple. The independence that children enjoyed was extraordinary. 8-year-olds would leave the house in the morning with instructions to be back when the streetlights come on, and then spend the entire day exploring their world. They would build elaborate forts in vacant lots, catch tadpoles in drainage ditches, play complex games of hide and seek that lasted for hours, and create imaginary worlds that were limited only by their creativity. Bicycle culture gave children a mobility and freedom that expanded their world exponentially. A bicycle wasn't just a toy. It was transportation, freedom, and adventure, all rolled into one. Children would ride their bikes for miles, exploring neighborhoods, parks, and wild areas that were far beyond walking distance. They would organize bicycle expeditions with friends, plan routes to interesting destinations, and experience the pure joy of speed and movement and discovery. The games that children played were incredible exercises in creativity, cooperation, and problem-solving. Kick the can, capture the flag, ghost in the graveyard, and dozens of other street games required no equipment, no adult supervision, and no predetermined rules. Children would negotiate the rules, resolve conflicts, include newcomers, and modify games based on circumstances. They learned leadership, compromise, fairness, and creativity through play. Tree climbing was practically a required childhood skill. Every neighborhood had climbing trees that children knew intimately, which branches were strong enough to hold weight, which routes led to the best views, where to build tree houses and rope swings. Children developed physical confidence, spatial awareness, and a deep connection to nature through the simple act of climbing trees. The freedom to explore extended to indoor spaces as well. Children were encouraged to pursue hobbies and interests without constant guidance or evaluation. They would spend hours reading, drawing, building models, collecting stamps or coins, or working on science projects simply because these activities interested them. There was no pressure to document these pursuits or turn them into resume-building achievements. Neighborhood businesses welcomed children in ways that seem impossible today. Kids could walk to the corner store with $1 and feel like important customers. Store owners knew children by name, would let them read comic books in the store, and trusted them to make purchases independently. Children learned how to interact with adults, handle money, and make decisions about spending their allowances. The responsibility that children carried was real and meaningful. They had household chores that actually contributed to family functioning. Feeding pets, taking out trash, helping with yard work, and caring for younger siblings. But these responsibilities came with genuine respect for their contributions and trust in their capabilities. After school time was unstructured and wonderful. Children would come home, grab a snack, and then disappear into their own worlds of play and exploration. There were no scheduled activities unless children specifically asked for them. No pressure to be constantly productive or educational. After school time was for decompressing, playing, and just being a kid. The relationship between children and adults was more respectful and less anxious than today. Adults trusted children to make good decisions and learn from their mistakes. Children respected adults but weren't afraid of them. There was a natural mentoring relationship where adults would teach children practical skills, share wisdom, and provide guidance without being controlling or overwhelming. Even television watching was a more social and less passive activity. Families would gather to watch shows together, discussing what they were seeing and sharing reactions. Children weren't isolated with individual devices. Television was a shared experience that brought families together rather than pulling them apart. Entertainment in the 70s had a magic that's almost impossible to recreate today. It was special because it was limited, social because it was shared, and memorable because you couldn't replay it whenever you wanted. Television was an event, not a background noise. Families would plan their evenings around their favorite shows, gathering in the living room with snacks and drinks to watch together. When The Wonderful World of Disney came on Sunday nights, it felt like a celebration. When a special movie was broadcast, it was appointment television that brought everyone together. But here's what made television so much better than today's endless streaming options. You had to pay attention because you couldn't rewind or watch again later. Every joke, every plot twist, every memorable moment had to be caught in real time. This created a shared cultural experience where everyone saw the same things at the same time and could discuss them the next day. The anticipation was incredible. If you missed your favorite show, you missed it completely until it was rerun months later. This scarcity made television feel precious and special. Children would negotiate bedtime extensions to watch special programs. Families would rearrange dinner schedules to accommodate must-see television. The limitations created value that unlimited access has destroyed. Radio was the soundtrack of daily life in the most beautiful way. Families would wake up to radio music, work around the house with radio playing, and drive everywhere with favorite stations providing the perfect background to their lives. But radio, in the 70s, had personality. DJs who told stories, shared local news, and created genuine connections with their listeners. The ritual of listening to the radio was wonderful. People would sit by their radios waiting for their favorite songs to come on so they could record them on cassette tapes. The anticipation, the careful timing with the record button, and the satisfaction of capturing a perfect recording created a relationship with music that downloading or streaming can't match. Record albums were treasures that provided hours of enjoyment beyond just the music. The large album covers were works of art that you could study while listening. The liner notes provided stories about the songs and musicians. The ritual of placing the needle on the record, sitting down to listen to the entire album from start to finish, and sharing favorite albums with friends created a deep appreciation for music as an art form. Going to the movies was a special occasion that families planned and anticipated. You couldn't watch movies at home unless they were broadcast on television years later, so seeing a movie in the theater was the only way to experience new films. This made moviegoing feel magical and important. Families would dress up slightly, buy special theater snacks, and make an evening of the experience. Drive-in movie theaters created a uniquely American entertainment experience that combined movies with socializing, privacy, and the simple pleasure of being outdoors. Families would load up the car with blankets, pillows, and homemade snacks to watch double features under the stars. Children could play on playground equipment before the movies started, then fall asleep in the back seat during the second feature. Board games and card games were regular family activities that brought multiple generations together around kitchen tables and living room floors. These weren't just rainy day activities. They were weekly traditions that created opportunities for friendly competition, strategic thinking, and lots of laughter. Families would have ongoing Monopoly tournaments, poker games with penny stakes, and Scrabble competitions that lasted for months. Music was a more social experience because it required effort and planning. If you wanted to hear your favorite album, you had to put it on the record player and sit down to listen. If you wanted to share music with friends, you had to invite them over or bring your records to their house. This made music appreciation a communal activity rather than a solitary experience. The local music scene was incredibly vibrant because there were fewer national entertainment options. Every town had local bands playing at school dances, community festivals, and small venues. People would actually go out to hear live music regularly, not as a special treat, but as a normal part of social life. This created opportunities for young musicians to develop their skills and for audiences to discover new music. Even the way people bought entertainment was more enjoyable. Record stores, bookstores, and toy stores were gathering places where people would browse leisurely, chat with knowledgeable staff, and discover new interests. Shopping for entertainment was itself entertaining, with store employees who were passionate about their products and eager to share recommendations. Life in 70s America moved at a pace that allowed people to actually enjoy their experiences instead of rushing through them to get to the next thing. This slower rhythm wasn't because people were lazy or unambitious. It was because they understood that a life lived too quickly is a life not fully experienced. Sunday was genuinely a day of rest that the entire culture respected. Most stores were closed, businesses didn't operate, and families knew they could count on having a full day together without outside obligations or pressures. Sunday morning might start with church, or sleeping late. Continue with a big family breakfast. Include visits with extended family, and end with everyone gathered around the television for family programming. The Sunday drive was a beautiful tradition that has completely disappeared from American life. Families would get in the car with no particular destination in mind and just drive through scenic areas, small towns, or interesting neighborhoods. The goal wasn't to accomplish anything or get anywhere specific. It was simply to spend time together, see something beautiful, and enjoy the simple pleasure of movement and discovery. Shopping was a leisurely social activity rather than a stressful necessity. People would spend Saturday mornings at farmers markets, chatting with vendors and neighbors while selecting fresh produce. They would browse through downtown stores, trying on clothes without pressure to buy, discovering new books, and enjoying the simple pleasure of looking at beautiful things. Meal preparation was a meditative daily ritual rather than a rushed inconvenience. People would spend time planning meals, shopping for ingredients, and cooking from scratch, not because they had to, but because the process itself was satisfying and nurturing. Cooking was a way to show love, express creativity, and create comfort for family and friends. The coffee culture of the 70s was about connection and conversation rather than caffeine efficiency. People would meet friends for coffee and spend hours talking, not because they had nothing better to do, but because they valued the relationship and the conversation. Coffee shops were community gathering places where people would read newspapers, play chess, and engage in the lost art of lingering. Letter writing was a beautiful way to maintain relationships and express thoughts that were too complex or important for phone conversations. People would sit down with good stationery and fountain pens to write real letters that took time, thought, and care to compose. Receiving a letter was an event that provided pleasure long after the envelope was opened. The evening routine was designed for winding down and connecting with family. After dinner, families might take walks around the neighborhood, work on puzzles together, listen to music, or simply sit on the porch talking. There was no pressure to be constantly productive or entertained. Just being together was enough. Weekend mornings were sacred time for sleeping late, reading the newspaper from cover to cover, and easing slowly into the day. Saturday morning cartoons for children and coffee, and conversation for adults, created a gentle transition from the work week to the weekend that honored everyone's need for rest and relaxation. Hobbies were pursued for pure enjoyment, rather than as side hustles or resume builders. People would spend hours working on model trains, knitting, woodworking, gardening, or photography, simply because these activities brought them joy and satisfaction. There was no pressure to monetize interests or turn every skill into a business opportunity. The pace of communication allowed for deeper, more thoughtful exchanges. Phone conversations were longer and more meaningful because people weren't constantly interrupted by other devices or commitments. When someone called, you sat down and really talked, sharing news, feelings, and ideas in ways that text messages and social media posts can't match. Even travel was slower and more immersive. Families would take road trips that included stops at roadside attractions, picnics at scenic overlooks, and overnight stays in local motels. The journey was part of the adventure, not just an inconvenience to endure while getting to the destination. People had time for spontaneous social connections. You might run into a neighbor at the grocery store and end up talking for 30 minutes about gardening, children, or current events. These unplanned conversations enriched daily life and strengthened community bonds in ways that scheduled social media interactions cannot replicate. Music in the 70s wasn't just background noise or personal entertainment. It was a cultural force that brought people together, defined generations, and created shared experiences that lasted lifetimes. The way people discovered, shared, and enjoyed music was so much richer and more meaningful than today's algorithm-driven playlists. The record store was the heart of musical discovery and community. These weren't just retail spaces. They were cultural centers where music lovers would spend hours browsing through albums, reading liner notes, and getting recommendations from knowledgeable staff who were passionate about music. You could spend an entire Saturday afternoon in a record store listening to new releases, chatting with other customers about favorite bands, and discovering artists you'd never heard of. Album cover art was a crucial part of the musical experience. The large 12-inch album covers were canvases for artistic expression that complemented and enhanced the music. People would study album covers while listening, reading every word of the liner notes and learning about the musicians, producers, and recording process. The physical relationship with music created a deeper appreciation for the artistry and craftsmanship involved. Radio DJs were cultural curators who introduced listeners to new music while providing personality and local connection. They would tell stories about the artists, share interesting facts about songs, and create themed shows that educated listeners about musical history and connections. Late-night radio was especially magical when DJs would play deeper cuts and create intimate atmospheres for listeners who were up late. The ritual of making mixtapes was an art form that expressed creativity, friendship, and romantic feelings in ways that Spotify playlists cannot match. Creating the perfect mixtape required careful thought about song selection, order, transitions, and the overall emotional journey. Making a mixtape for someone was a deeply personal gift that took hours to create and could be treasured for years. Live music was much more accessible and integrated into community life. Every town had venues where local bands played regularly. School auditoriums hosted touring acts, and outdoor festivals brought music to parks and fairgrounds. Seeing live music wasn't a luxury reserved for major concerts. It was a regular part of social life that exposed people to diverse musical styles and created opportunities for discovery. The shared experience of popular music created genuine cultural moments that brought entire generations together. When a great song came on the radio, everyone would stop what they were doing to listen and sing along. Popular songs became soundtracks for entire summers, school years, or life events in ways that created lasting emotional connections. House parties always centered around music, with hosts carefully selecting albums to create the right atmosphere for different parts of the evening. People would gather around record players, requesting favorite songs and discovering new ones through friends' collections. Dancing wasn't something you did only at clubs. It was a natural response to good music that happened anywhere people gathered. Musical diversity was greater because there were fewer corporate gatekeepers controlling what people heard. Local radio stations, independent record stores, and regional venues created space for experimental music, ethnic music, and genre blending that wouldn't necessarily appeal to mass markets. This diversity exposed listeners to musical styles and influences that enriched their appreciation for different cultures and artistic expressions. The anticipation surrounding new album releases was extraordinary. People would mark their calendars for release dates, plan trips to record stores, and gather with friends to listen to new albums together for the first time. The shared discovery of hearing your favorite band's new material was a bonding experience that created lasting memories and deepened friendships. Concert experiences were more intimate and less commercialized. Venues were smaller, tickets were more affordable, and the focus was on the music rather than elaborate stage productions. People would sit on blankets at outdoor concerts, dance freely at club shows, and feel genuine connections with performers who were more accessible and less separated from their audiences. The way families shared music across generations was beautiful. Parents would introduce children to their favorite artists, while kids would play new music for their parents. Family record collections were eclectic mixtures of different generations' tastes, creating opportunities for musical education and appreciation that bridged age gaps and created common ground. Even the process of listening to music was more intentional and rewarding. You couldn't skip songs easily, so you listened to entire albums and often discovered favorite tracks that you might have initially overlooked. The limitations of the format encouraged deeper listening and greater appreciation for the artistic choices that musicians made in creating cohesive album experiences. Friendship in 70s America was deeper, more consistent, and more meaningful than the social connections we manage today. Without the constant noise of social media and digital communication, people invested more time and emotional energy in fewer higher quality relationships that provided genuine intimacy and support. Making plans with friends required real commitment and intention. You couldn't text someone at the last minute to change plans. You had to call them. And often you had to plan activities days or weeks in advance. This meant that when friends got together, everyone was present and engaged because the investment in making it happen was significant. Friend groups were more stable and long-lasting because social circles weren't constantly shifting based on online interactions or algorithmic suggestions. People developed deep friendships with neighbors, coworkers, and classmates that lasted for decades. These weren't casual acquaintances or networking contacts. They were genuine relationships built on shared experiences, mutual support, and real intimacy. The activities that friends enjoyed together were more creative and engaging than today's typical social media-driven gatherings. Friends would spend entire evenings talking, playing games, listening to music, cooking together, or working on shared projects. Conversations were deeper because there were no devices competing for attention and no pressure to document everything for social sharing. Social gatherings were more inclusive and spontaneous. It was common for friends to drop by each other's houses unannounced, knowing they'd be welcomed for coffee, a meal, or just conversation. Parties evolved organically as word spread through friend networks, and it wasn't unusual for gatherings to include people from different social circles who were introduced through mutual friends. The way friends supported each other through difficult times was extraordinary. Without professional therapists being widely accessible or acceptable, friends provided emotional support, practical help, and genuine care during crises. People would show up with casseroles when someone was sick, help with childcare during emergencies, and provide shoulders to cry on during heartbreaks or family problems. Female friendships were especially rich and supportive. Women would gather regularly for coffee, host each other for lunch, and maintain close relationships that provided emotional intimacy and practical support. These friendships weren't competitive or superficial. They were based on genuine care, shared experiences, and mutual respect. Male friendships had a different but equally valuable quality. Men would spend time together working on cars, playing sports, or pursuing shared hobbies, without feeling pressure to constantly communicate their feelings or analyze their relationships. These friendships were built on shared activities and mutual respect, providing companionship and support in more subtle but equally important ways. Intergenerational friendships were common and valued. Older adults would mentor younger people, sharing wisdom and experience while gaining energy and fresh perspectives. Younger adults would help older friends with physical tasks while learning life skills and gaining perspective from people who had lived through different eras. The way friends celebrated milestones and achievements was more personal and meaningful. Birthday parties were intimate gatherings, focused on honoring the person being celebrated. Graduations, promotions, and life changes were marked with personal gifts, heartfelt conversations, and genuine expressions of pride and support. Friend groups often had their own traditions and inside jokes that created strong bonds and shared identity. Regular activities like weekly card games, annual camping trips, or monthly dinner parties created continuity and gave friendships structure and rhythm that strengthened relationships over time. The correspondence between distant friends was an art form that maintained intimacy despite geographical separation. People would write long letters sharing details about their daily lives, thoughts, and feelings in ways that created genuine connection and understanding. Receiving a letter from a friend was an event that provided joy and maintained relationships across time and distance. Even casual social interactions were more meaningful. People would have real conversations with neighbors, coworkers, and acquaintances, sharing stories, opinions, and personal experiences that created a sense of community and belonging. These weren't superficial exchanges. They were genuine human connections that enriched daily life. The loyalty and dependability of 70s friendships created a sense of security and belonging that's difficult to achieve in today's more fluid social environment. People knew they could count on their friends for emotional support, practical help, and genuine companionship through all of life's ups and downs. The 70s were filled with simple pleasures that cost little money but provided enormous satisfaction and joy. These weren't consolation prizes for people who couldn't afford better entertainment. They were genuinely enriching experiences that made daily life feel abundant and meaningful. Saturday morning was pure magic for families. Children would wake up early to watch cartoons while parents enjoyed coffee and newspapers in peaceful quiet. The anticipation of weekend adventures, the luxury of unscheduled time, and the simple pleasure of being together without obligations created a weekly rhythm that everyone looked forward to. The evening ritual of gathering on front porches or in backyards was a daily celebration of community and connection. As the workday ended and dinner was finished, neighbors would naturally migrate to outdoor spaces, where conversations would flow naturally, children would play freely, and the simple pleasure of being outside in good weather would refresh everyone's spirits. Seasonal activities had a special magic because they weren't commercialized or overscheduled. Spring meant planting gardens, opening windows for the first time, and feeling genuinely excited about warmer weather. Summer meant barbecues, swimming, and long evenings outdoors. Fall meant leaves, apple picking, and the cozy pleasure of returning indoors. Winter meant snow play, hot chocolate, and the warmth of family gatherings. The Sunday newspaper was a weekly treasure that provided hours of entertainment and education. Families would divide up the sections, read interesting articles aloud to each other, work on crossword puzzles together, and use the comics to start conversations with children. The newspaper created shared experiences and gave families common topics for discussion throughout the week. Cooking and baking were creative outlets that provided satisfaction far beyond nutrition. People would experiment with new recipes, share successful dishes with neighbors, and take pride in creating delicious meals for their families. The process of cooking was as enjoyable as the results, providing opportunities for creativity, meditation, and nurturing. Gardening was a widespread hobby that connected people with nature, provided fresh food and beautiful flowers, and created opportunities for sharing with neighbors. Vegetable gardens were practical and satisfying, while flower gardens provided beauty and color that enhanced entire neighborhoods. The seasonal rhythm of planting, tending, and harvesting created natural connections with the cycles of nature. Walking was a regular and enjoyable activity rather than scheduled exercise. People would take evening walks around their neighborhoods, weekend hikes in local parks, and leisurely strolls through downtown areas. Walking provided exercise, fresh air, and opportunities for conversation and observation that enriched daily life. Reading was a more central part of daily life because there were fewer competing entertainment options. People would read newspapers thoroughly, enjoy novels and magazines without interruption, and share book recommendations with friends and family. Reading provided education, entertainment, and escape in ways that created lasting satisfaction and intellectual growth. The arts were more integrated into community life through school programs, community theaters, local art shows, and music performances. People would attend high school plays, support community orchestras, visit local art exhibitions, and participate in creative activities themselves. The arts weren't just professional entertainment. They were community expressions that brought people together. Holiday celebrations were more focused on family traditions and less on commercial consumption. Families would create their own holiday rituals, prepare traditional foods together, and focus on spending quality time, rather than exchanging expensive gifts. The emphasis was on creating memories and strengthening relationships rather than acquiring things. Even mundane activities had a pleasurable quality because they weren't rushed or stressful. Grocery shopping included conversations with store employees and neighbors. Running errands provided opportunities to see friends and explore different parts of town. Daily tasks were opportunities for small social interactions that made ordinary life feel richer and more connected. The rhythm of work and rest was more balanced and humane. People worked hard during designated hours, but evenings and weekends were genuinely free time that could be used for relaxation, family time, hobbies, and social activities. The boundaries between work and personal life were clearer and more respected. So here we are, looking back at a decade that might have figured out some essential truths about living well that we've somehow forgotten in our rush toward technological progress and economic efficiency. The 70s weren't perfect. No era is. But they got some really important things right about human connection, community life, and simple pleasures. The most important lesson from 70s America is that happiness doesn't come from having more choices, more convenience, or more stuff. It comes from having deeper relationships, stronger communities, and more meaningful daily experiences. The limitations that people lived with in the 70s, fewer entertainment options, less convenience, more dependence on neighbors, actually created richer, more satisfying lives. We can't turn back time, but we can absolutely reclaim some of these practices and values that made life more connected and meaningful. Start with your own family dinner table. Put the phones in another room and actually talk to each other. Ask real questions, share stories, and create that sacred space for connection that families desperately need. It doesn't have to be fancy or perfect. It just has to be consistent and genuine. Rediscover your neighborhood. Take evening walks. Sit on your front porch if you have one, and make an effort to know your neighbors' names. Organize a block party or a neighborhood potluck. Create the community connections that used to happen naturally, but now require intentional effort. Slow down your entertainment consumption. Instead of binge-watching entire series, try watching one episode and then talking about it with your family or friends. Choose one album to listen to completely, instead of shuffling through playlists. Make entertainment more intentional and social, rather than passive and isolating. Bring back letter writing and meaningful correspondence. Take time to write real letters or emails to friends and family members who matter to you. Express appreciation, share your thoughts and feelings, and invest in relationships that deserve more than quick text messages or social media likes. Create technology-free zones and times in your home. Designate certain hours or spaces where devices aren't welcome, allowing for the kinds of organic conversations and connections that happened naturally in the 70s. Most importantly, remember that progress isn't always improvement. Sometimes, the old ways of doing things were actually better for human happiness and connection. We don't have to accept that busy, isolated, digitally mediated lives are the inevitable price of modern convenience. The people who lived through the 70s didn't know they were living in a golden age of American community life. They were just living their normal lives, following social patterns and cultural practices that prioritized human connection over efficiency and productivity. But looking back, we can see that they created something beautiful and valuable that we've partially lost. The good news is that most of these practices and values are completely within our reach today. We don't need different technology or more money or government policy changes. We just need to make different choices about how we spend our time, how we relate to our neighbors, and what we prioritize in our daily lives. The 70s show us that the best parts of life aren't complicated or expensive. They're about showing up for each other, creating genuine connections, and finding joy in simple, everyday experiences. In a world that often feels chaotic and disconnected, maybe it's time to learn from a decade that figured out how to live well. Because, at the end of the day, the question isn't whether we can recreate the 70s prokes. The question is whether we can recreate the sense of community, connection, and contentment that made that decade special. And the answer is absolutely yes, if we're willing to make the effort. What aspects of 70s life are you most inspired to bring back into your own life? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos about the hidden wisdom of America's past. Because sometimes looking backward is the best way to move forward.